I have actually my eldest daughter's baby shoes on my desk. I used to use them as a prop in training because it's about baby steps. It's about being better than zero every day. So you're not going to completely change your life. And yeah, we heard the stories about like the smoker who goes into the doctor's office and they've smoked for 30 years and magically they quit. But in business and the work that I do with executives, it's baby steps and it's celebrating the small wins. That's something a lot of drivens don't do. And I know I suck at it. I do not celebrate very well.
Today, we're going to have a fun episode. We're having Hamish Knox. He's a coach at Sandler. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Sandler, because I'm confused because it seems like you are Sandler. Sandler, everything is due. You know what it is? Driven people usually end up in the sales seat, and you're the OG of that. So kind of like I'm not sure what we're getting into.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for having me, Rachel and Dr. Doug. So I have a couple of businesses. My one of my businesses is called Full Funnel Freedom. It runs my podcast of the same name. And then yes, I've been a member of the Sandler Network based in Calgary, Alberta, for 13 years as of May 11th, 2024. So Sandler is the largest leadership and sales development company in the world. My office is in Calgary. We are supporting clients literally around the world. My team and I are. So we are supporting people sustainably scale their sales so they can eventually exit for their number, not the number they're told to take. And at the same time, have more effective human to human interactions professionally and personally.
Very cool.
Very cool. So, driven origin story. Tell us about how did you become Hamish?
Well, so I'm a Canadian compromise, number one. So my grandfather is James Knox. My dad is James Knox Jr. They wanted to call me James Knox the third. And my mom said no. So they called me Hamish, which means James in Gaelic. So technically I am James Knox the third. So I grew up in a village of 500 people called Malacqua, which is halfway, 6 hours from Vancouver and Calgary, up in Canada on the Trans-Canada Highway, 6 hours if you follow the speed limit. And from a very young age, I was different. I was the tallest kid in my school from the time I was 6 years old. And that's kindergarten to grade 7, very rural community. And I had a name that, everyone else was Dave and Daniel and Brian and Susan and Sandra. So I stood out like a bit of a sore thumb. And I was always interested in things that my peers were not. So I was picked on quite heavily in elementary school, especially, and just developed a lot of resilience. Unfortunately, I have two very, very supportive and caring parents. And so they really got me through elementary school. And then, of course, when I got into high school, I had to take a bus, about a half an hour away to get to grade 8 to 12 high school, where I ended up starting the men's basketball program in grade 10 with 5 of my buddies, and the women's basketball program in grade 11 as the head coach.
Wow. So I got to go back to the parents. How did they nourish your drivenness?
They always made it okay for me to ask questions. They always made it okay for me to learn. We had two television channels when I grew up. So I spent a lot of time listening to records and reading all of the wonderful books they had. My father retired as a public health inspector, but he started as a junior high science teacher. So I had all these weird and wonderful science books. My mother stayed at home with my brother and I when we were in elementary school, but then she eventually, she was a piano teacher. She worked at the local library as a part-time, but then she also became a special education assistant and finished her career working with elementary school aged children who had very severe mental and emotional developmental challenges. So my mom is one of the most nurturing people that I've ever met. Now she's my mom, right? So grain of salt, but she is also incredibly tough. She told me a story once about she was taking a group of the students in this program cross country skiing about an hour away from where the school was, and one of the children was acting up as children do, and finally she said, David, if you act up one more time, I'm pulling to the side of the road and letting you out. And one of the other students turned to David and said, "She'll do it."
So that low empathy is generational, huh?
A little bit. And we also grew up on a farm. We had a 10-acre hobby farm, right? So my whole growing up was you milk the cow in the morning, you pick the eggs out of the chicken coop in the afternoon. In the summertime, you're weeding the garden, you're picking berries, you're out in the fields with the animals. And then come fall, I got to learn about the other side of life when it comes to being on a farm. And I was butchering chickens and helping with the other larger farm animals from the time that I was, old enough to walk. And and it used to be we'd get the community together, and it was really a community event of, you get together and you slaughter the cow, and everyone goes home with a little bit of something to say thank you for helping. And so I got a really strong work ethic and commitment right away because if you don't feed the animals every day, they die. And
Right.
that's not a good thing.
Mm.
And I've heard this from all of my drivens that had this open, really a nurturing freedom. Your curiosity flourished, but you also had responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so it taught you that both, was there a time for work and a time for play? When did you feel freest as a kid?
Always, to be quite frank, like there's this, nonsense conversation around what is normal. And I've said, like, what is normal for my daughters is completely crazy for children who are 20 miles to the east of us. And so for me, it was life. And it was wonderful because I got to wake up every day and I got to have, a loving family there who supported me. I got to have as much food as I wanted to eat. And you can't tell, I'm 6'7". And so I got an extra long arm, so I needed a lot of food. So I got to have wonderful food to eat. I got to go ride my bike wherever I wanted. Like there was no restrictions on, and my friends, by the way, lived a 15, 20-minute bike ride away. So I'm just like, hey, mom, going to Brian's place. She's like, sounds good. If you come back for dinner, great. If not, call me and say that you're eating at Brian's. So I had lots of freedom and flexibility.
I,
And so how did the shame land? But you were picked on.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that. Did your parents buffer you from that? How did you make sense of it?
So a little bit. So actually, reading Driven was like reading a user manual to myself.
Wow.
And I was like, oh yeah, this is why I feel all this way. Like, oh, I totally see it, and I totally see like all of the dopamine drivers, and we'll touch on how I almost put myself out of business later. But the shame thing, like I remember, and I haven't told this story ever since it happened. So I was 6 years old, and there was a girl at the time, right? So I'm in grade 1, and there was this girl named Carla, and she was in grade 5, and she was as tall as I was, right? So again, I was the tallest kid in my school from the time I was 6, and of course, Carla being in grade 5, she was as tall as I was, and she was my first crush, right? And I went home one day after school, and I said, "Mom, can I have some flowers out of your garden? Because I want to take them to Carla tomorrow." And my mom initially was like, yeah, hey, great. Then, she was making dinner or whatever, right? And then after dinner, she's, it's like, hey, can you come here for a sec? I said, yeah. And she said, Dad and I are not going to let you take flowers to Carla. And I said, what do you mean by that? Like, it's like we have plenty of flowers in the garden. And she said, because what we're really afraid of is you're going to get teased. I'm getting emotional telling this story. You're going to get picked on, and we don't want you to get picked on for doing something that is really, really kind that the other kids will not understand.
So at 6, you were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You discovered that really that sense of protection from your parents. I mean, that is the core of it, and I'm sure that's the emotional.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Did you take the flowers?
No, never did. Never did.
I kissed Julie Suggs in 6th grade, and it wound up being one of the most traumatic things. I wound up getting a migraine 2 days later and throwing up at school. Yeah, that was one of the core shame experience I had. And that experience of being protected, how did that carry through? I mean, because it must have been just your kids are mean.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Well, also, I had laser surgery a while ago, but I wore glasses from the time I was 6. And like, these are like thick, Coke bottle-y, So very different name, right? Kids pick on things that are different, right? So very different name. I'm the tallest kid. I don't wear all the latest fashions. I don't have fruit roll-ups or Lunchables in my lunch, right? My mom made my lunch. Like I had a smorgasbord of things to get picked on, and then add the glasses in. Lack of coordination as well, because I grew very quickly, so I wasn't overly coordinated, and it was really like I can remember. Again, I haven't told this story ever. I was in grade 7 and sitting at the dining room table of my parents' farmhouse, crying at my parents and saying how much I suck. And they're like, "You don't suck. Like, where is this coming from? What do you mean?" And so, like, suicidal ideation all day long, right? From the time I was in grade 7. Now, here's the one thing: I never acted on it.
Yeah.
Because I thought about it, and then I thought about not only my parents, right? And so it was always this very strong connection of, well, what am I leaving behind? And how is that affecting other people? So because I had this very strong connection with my parents and also with several friends, right? You grow up in a village of 500 people, and my next closest relative was Vancouver, so like 6 hour drive away. So we didn't see our relatives very much. They weren't making a pilgrimage out to rural British Columbia. We had to go see them. And so my friends have always been my family. And so I had a very supportive friend group. And so that's why I'm here. If I grew up in a big city where I could just basically disappear, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today.
Yeah, and that deep shame is just so sticky.
Mm-hmm.
Buffering. Are you a parent now?
Yeah, 2 girls, almost 12 and turned 9 in February.
We'll come to that, but it's a different
You know
world.
what's interesting that I'm noticing though is Dr. Doug, you have a story about a girl and shame, and Hamish has, and many times parents talk to me and they're like, nature versus nurture, how can we prevent that? And the answer is we really can't. We could just buffer it, and we can look at the after effects between the people that did have somebody in their life holding their back versus those that didn't. I don't know, Dr. Doug, if you had somebody or not, but I have this belief, and I don't have enough research to back it, that the difference between people that are successful versus those who aren't is they just have one person in their life that believed in them, just
Yeah.
one person.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma literature, it is very critical that you can have that one resource
Mm-hmm.
that you can hang on to, and you had multiple resources, but it didn't take away that desire to kill this part of you that felt so different.
Right.
Amen.
And that as a parent gives you a certain comfort to let go and know that it's not in our control. We
Mm-hmm.
can't prevent our kids from going through that shame.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's the resilience, and that's what I'm hearing is the resilience. And so 7th grade, you're at the dinner table, and your parents are doing everything they can.
Mm-hmm.
And did it resolve itself? How did it?
So I'm very good at compartmentalizing and very good at moving forward. So there's a Russian proverb that I read when I was 7 that says, if you live in the past, you will lose an eye. And so I have always, like, I was 7. And so I am always going forward. I'm always moving forward. I'm learning from the past. I'm, analyzing in real time. Okay, what didn't work? What did? What do I adjust? And so this is a conversation that my now ex and I had, basically that was the beginning of the end of our relationship around, I don't go backwards. And that has always caused me to move forward.
And that at 7, little kid figuring out that better has no finish line. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's wild.
Yeah.
And that resilience is, thank God for parents.
Amen.
Amen.
It's like I always say, I don't make the same mistake twice.
Yep.
You try not to. That is, yeah. And then, so 500 people, you
Yeah.
know everybody, and then what?
So high school was the next town over, which is 3,000 people in the summer and then 12,000, or 3,000 in the winter and then 12,000 in the summer. It's the houseboat capital of Canada. It's called Sicamous. And so that was high school, grade 8 to 12. And then literally I graduated high school, and 2 months later I moved down to New Westminster, which is a suburb of Vancouver, because there wasn't anything for me to do where I grew up. Like it was, work on the houseboats, work in forestry, like none of that was in any way appealing to me. So I moved down, went to Douglas College, got into a closed professional writing program that I had to apply to. I also started a high school sports column for the Eagle Valley News in Sicamous when I was 16, because I wanted to write, I wanted to create. And then I went down and I worked at the Other Press in New Westminster for 3 years. First as their sports editor, then I became their advertising sales manager, and then I was also their production editor for about 3 years.
Writing, that is I have many stories about not being able to spell and write. I'm not my thing, but what is it about writing that spoke to your drivenness?
Well, I like words. So I grew up, again, 2 television channels. I read a lot. So sword and sorcery, sci-fi, and my dad is a huge reader. He usually has 3, 4 books on the go at any one time, nonfiction, fiction, all kinds of things. And also I have a stand-up comedy brain. So I actually started listening to 8-track tapes of George Carlin, like hippy dippy weatherman stuff. And so George Carlin is all about words and language, and he says, the one of his bits in Jamming in New York is or Parental Advisory is the quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language. And I heard that when I was 12. And so that just really resonated with me, is like, yeah, if I want to communicate effectively, and if I want to have really inspired ideas, I have to learn the language. And so part of my 25-year vision that I'm working on right now is to be fluent in 8 languages.
Goodness. Wow. So you are driven. Holy smokes, are you driven? Girls, relationship. How did you?
I'm curious how
back to the comedy. I'm actually I have a chapter in my next book about drivens or comedians, because we are brilliant. And what comedy is actually you're walking the audience down a very specific narrative. And then you jump tracks.
Yes.
And it's that timing of jumping tracks laughter is a spontaneous reaction. It's not something so it's a biological, in my language, elephant to elephant.
Yeah.
And so, did you write comedy? Was that part of it?
So yes, and so when I was 13, given where I grew up, it was fairly conservative Christian. Right. And so again, not a lot to do. So you join the church youth group, right? Because if you're going to hang out, because that's where pretty much everyone is. So when I was 13, I did a very heavily edited version of George Carlin's airline announcements bit in front of 700 people at a church youth group convention.
Holy!
It was my first time on stage.
And you balls.
It was awesome. It was so much fun. I haven't told that story ever since it happened. And oh my God, it was amazing. I would write jokes, I would write bits, I would write sketches, and they were mostly for me, but a lot of it was just sort of that life happening things where to your point about, you're going down this one path and then you take someone down a different path, and that laughter bonds us, right? The laughter is a connection device. And so, when you talk about girls and all that, and, did you? No, I didn't. I mean, so the thing is that I've always related to women way better than I've related to men. And I actually say regularly, I don't get guys. I just don't get guys. Like locker room talk and all, that actually turns my stomach. It completely off-puts me. And yes, I have very close male friends, but I've always bonded more with women. I went tampon shopping with one of my friends when we were in high school. She's like, I gotta go. And I'm like, okay, awesome. Let's just go do that. That's who you are. It's part of who you are. Why am I going to get weirded out by that? So I've always been the friend, or mostly been the friend. I'm also very oblivious to those signals. So that's another thing where I'm just like, just tell me what you want, or I'm not going to pick it up. You'll have to hit me with the 2x4. Because if you're hinting at it, I'm just gonna be like, yeah, so movies on Saturday. That sounds like a good idea. And then it's the movie that I'm thinking about, not the invitation.
Oh, interesting.
It's the situational identity, being able to sometimes I go to an event and somebody's like, did you notice that person is pregnant? I'm like, I didn't notice because I'm so spaced out doing other things that you didn't, the situational identity that you don't.
So in Canada, in Canada for passports, it used to be you had to get like a doctor or a lawyer or something like that to sign your passport application. And then that changed, and it could be someone who has known you for more than 2 years. So my friend Corrine, who's the editor at the Other Press, she put me down as a reference. So I get a call from the Canada Border Patrol, and they're like, "Yeah, calling about Corrine's application." I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "So how tall is she?" I said, "Well, let me put it this way. I'm 6'7". She's shorter than I am. And they said, "Okay, what color are her eyes?" And I said, "I can tell you she has two of them." And they're like, "How long have you worked with this person?" I said, 5 years every day. And they're like, "We'll put you down as you know her." I'm like, "Okay, you do you."
I've got to go down this road. What is it about women? I've got two
Uh,
daughters, and I older brother, two younger brothers,
yeah.
boys. I mean, we were, fishing and hunting, and and then women just became this amazing mystery to me.
It's I'm a softie. I know it doesn't come across, but I want to support everybody. My daily question is, who did I support today? And women are naturally more supportive, right? If you go back way back when, wherever you believe we came from, men were the hunter-gatherers and women were the supporters, right? They were the ones who kept the fires going and cooked the food and made the clothing and all that. And I just relate better at that more nurturing, bonding, supportive. How can we work through this together, as opposed to everybody out for themselves and, look how physically well proportioned I am. Like, I think all that's nonsense and a waste of my time. I just don't like it. I like having those much more intellectual conversations.
Men tend to be much more externally narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
Just identify with things and objects and whatever.
Yep.
Women, but it speaks to this bonding, and you use that word 10 times, and
yeah,
it most men, don't really have your back. It's not that wolf pack sense of connection.
mm-hmm.
You find that in women?
I really do. And that's actually something I've heard you speak about on the podcast several times, is this idea of wolf pack. And actually, my eldest daughter's nickname is Wolf, because the first noises she made when she was a baby sounded like howling. And she's always been my wolf. She is never little wolf, never diminutive. She is always my wolf, because I never wanted her to feel like she was lower than. So I find that with women is that bonding. And then also, there are those social norms, though, right? Like, if you're not supporting the community, you're going to be out. And like we were talking off air about our mutual friend Justin and his analysis of my StrengthsFinder report, and he's like, "Yeah, when you're tight with someone, you're tight with them, and if you're not, they're dead to you." I was like, "Yeah, that's a pretty accurate assessment." And by the way, it doesn't mean that I don't love that person. It just means I'm supporting other individuals who have got my attention. And if that person comes back and goes, "Hey, man, let's have a coffee. Let's, I need some support, whatever," I'll be like, "Absolutely. Let's do this. I still love you. I just have all these other people that I'm working with right now, and I just don't have the mental capacity. If I try to support everybody, I'm going to fry my brain. If I support the one person at a time, I'm going to be successful and they're going to be successful."
Very driven. I can hear all the parts and pieces, how they integrate together in that sense of real sense of hyper focus.
Mm-hmm.
This bond is so fluid through you. Girl, you mentioned kids.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a woman somewhere.
There was, and we were together for 23 and a half years. And she asked for a divorce in a couples therapy session, September 22nd of 2023. And we signed the separation October 13th of 2023. I moved out on the 16th, and it's very amicable. I see my daughters every single week, which I know is very rare. And it's been, an experience I didn't ever think I would go through, but it's also been something where I've completely changed my view of myself. I did a talk back in March, and one of my friends saw it, and he said, you know, I've seen you speak for years, and I love watching you speak. You are so much more relaxed now. And I said, yeah, because I love myself.
Interesting. And how are you different since being divorced?
Really, I subsumed myself for the relationship, and to support my now ex, who is a professional. She's very smart, and to support my daughters, because I've read all the psychology about what it means for girls to not have a strong male influence in their lives, especially around the ages that my eldest is getting to, right? She'll be 12, about a month away from when we're recording this. So for me, it was like, again, wolf pack, tribe, whatever you want to call it. It's like, I will subsume myself for the good of the tribe. And now, as someone pointed out to me, I have a really wonderful relationship with both of my daughters. And I don't have to subsume myself anymore.
Very, when you say subsume yourself, I mean, fully be yourself is what I'm hearing. And
yeah, I can be myself now.
How is that different?
Oh, I wasn't myself. I wasn't asking for what I wanted. I wasn't, I wasn't true to my emotions. I wasn't true with my ex. I wasn't, because, and as I said to our couples therapist, I was like, I've beaten my head against that wall enough times to know that I don't want to beat my head against that wall anymore. So I'm going to go find other avenues to get the support, the emotional support that I am looking for. And I'll just forget about beating my head against that wall, because I'm not going to do that.
Does she understand Driven? Did she get you?
Not at all.
Not
at all.
Did you scare her?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was my experience. And I was divorced September 23rd of 23 was my, yeah.
Wow. So that was the day after I got asked.
Yeah, very, and we're dear friends, not a day in court, amicable split.
Yep.
50-50 custody with the kids. And it's just, she very linear. She's electrical engineer. I mean, just very linear, very logical, very smart.
Yep.
And just completely baffled by the nuanced world that I lived in. I mean, I live in pure nuance for everything.
Yeah.
Both of you believe that there's a possibility of bridging that gap? Because I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is exactly like the pain that I see all over.
So it has to be, there has to be a wanting on both sides, right? So I have a good friend of mine, her name's Amy. She does a talk called Own Your 50, right? Which is like, you own your 50% of the conversation, the other person owns your 50%. And this is something I had said, in therapy, was I'm done with owning 80%. Right? And so the reason that this is a challenge is because I've backed off to the point where I should have been initially. I should have stayed here and reached my hand across to say, I'm here, like, come this way and we'll do this together. And that was rejected. So as long as the other person is willing and able to say, okay, I don't get you, you scare me, and I'm willing to, at the very least, attempt to understand and attempt to support you, and you need to attempt to support me this way, it can work. But if there isn't that mutual support system in place for the couple, it's going to fall apart.
Yeah. The extreme curiosity of Drivens, and I don't want to say lack of curiosity, but the difference in curiosity of it's just, it was such a, I was so curious about her and so into it, and it didn't feel like it was coming back towards me.
Yeah.
Similar?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Very, very similar.
And you know what? In the theme that I see is that drivenness is created by overextending yourself, resilience, right? I need to be this person that the world is telling me to be. And then we
Mm.
get into that relationship and you're also overextending yourself and without being assertive and saying what you want, and then it's too late, right?
Mhm.
Because you've crossed that line where you're growing too far apart. My question is like, did you feel as a child that you had to be somebody to something? Because what I'm realizing is
Mm.
most of the time when we get into a relationship, what I realized is that that came before the relationship.
Mhm.
That that characteristic of overextending ourselves
Mhm.
came before this relationship.
Mhm. Very, very true. And I've said to my team, like, sometimes I wish that I could be the person that other people think I am, because, in my business, uh, I get regular feedback about, oh, you're amazing, and oh, I'm so grateful that we're working together, and oh, this, and you changed my life, and this and that, which I am not downplaying in any way. I'm incredibly grateful for that. And then I would basically leverage that so I could buffer, because when I went back home, it was just a continual pull down, right? It was like I had to use this positive energy in my business to maintain my sanity in the home. And so, yes, from an early childhood, I thought I had to perform.
Right.
Right.
And
I thought I had to be someone else, or I had to act in a certain way. And like we've all seen in the movies, the nerdy kid who tries to act like the cool kids doesn't last very long and usually falls apart in a pretty spectacular way. So I've learned over time how to be true to myself while also intuiting what other people are seeking. And one of my former team members called me the most intuitive person they've ever met. Um, because they would, I could do the like, how you doing? They go, fine. I'd be like, really? And then it
Yeah,
would all come out.
that was my experience in my marriage too. In my intuition was so strong, but
Yeah.
I can, and that's kind of that's how I make my living. I can
Mm.
see things that the other person isn't even aware of seeing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it took me a long time to really see how scary that can be, how terrifying that can be.
Mhm.
People who aren't of this, living in this intuitive, nuanced soup that you and I are in.
Exactly. I tell my clients regularly, I love being wrong, like especially if they're hiring someone and I'm like, I love being wrong. Please tell me I'm wrong because I get to learn, right? I get new data. I want to be wrong. I have a lot of data that says that I'm going to be right.
Yeah.
But please tell me that I'm going to be wrong, because then that allows me to learn and grow more. But when it comes to humans, I got plenty of data.
And so this reclaiming of self and this new being fully you,
Mhm.
is when do you feel most like yourself now? Completely you.
I, to be quite frank, right now. I mean, literally, as we're recording this, I'm just like, whether you call it flow, whether you call it connected to the universe. I was having a meeting with my longtime associate Nisha, who's now the president of my company, and yesterday, and she said, hey, how are you doing? And we've been together, long enough as colleagues, that we've really supported each other through a lot of things. And I said, you know what? It's one of those like, you could say I'm ready to die. Now I'm not ready to die, by the way, but it's like one of those moments where I feel completely at peace. I feel completely connected. What is happening is happening. And I'm a big improv guy. And so I was talking to a friend of mine recently about this idea of my life as a herald. And herald is a long form improv that really is not meant to be funny. It's to tell a story. And that's the way I'm looking at my life now, is my life is a herald. So I can have a plan. I do. I can have goals. I do. And the universe is going to throw things at me. And I need to be able to improv my way through those, as opposed to like, I'm on a path, because that usually doesn't go very well.
Yeah, it's so you're beingness rather than your doingness, and it is this internal rudder that you're finding. How old are you?
I'm 44 in May.
Carl Jung said that men are either 16 or 45 when they want to.
Ha!
At 16, we're out to conquer the world. At 45, we realize it isn't the world we needed to conquer, it's ourselves.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. I trained Muay Thai for 10.5 years. So that was, that was a lot of doing that, was conquering myself more than anything.
What haven't you done? Is
I'm curious. You're working in Sandler's, you're working with people that are most probably driven. What insights could you give us around working with other people? And they most probably might not have the insight that they are driven. And you must probably see somebody where like, oh, I see it.
And it's usually because they're expressing frustration about their team, right? So it's like, why aren't they doing what I do? It's like, because they're not you. So a lot of when I'm working, and especially because my work starts at the top, so CEO, entrepreneur, whatever their owner, founder, and it's helping them understand that no one is ever going to be like them, and they're the bottleneck to getting to the success that they actually want to get to. So we have a client, is actually my longest consecutive client. His name's Alex. He runs an IT firm here in Calgary. And when we started working together, he had 4 children under 10. The youngest is now 16, I think. And he was consistently working over 65 hours a week. And within the first year, he was down under 40 hours a week, and his sales had increased by 50%. And we're still working together. It'll be 11 years, December 1st of this year, since we started working together.
so how do you get driven men, primarily men?
Primarily men. Our client base, oddly enough, is at least 50-50 men to women. And at one point, it was 65 women to men in both our sales and our sales leader groups.
Wow.
Yeah.
We'll come back to driven women, but it's that magic moment when you can get your client to actually see that the biggest problem they have is themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? What is the process you take people through?
In my most nurturing voice.
Show us that low empathy strength finder.
Some of the things that my clients have said about me is Hamish makes things make very, very simple. I'm like, yes, that's my talent. It's very simple. I know it's not easy, but I make it. So for me, it's really that discernment, that just like, let's strip this to the core. And I have actually my eldest daughter's baby shoes on my desk. I used to use them as a prop in training, because it's about baby steps. It's about being better than 0 every day. So you're not going to completely change your life. And yeah, we've heard the stories about like the smoker who goes into the doctor's office and they've smoked for 30 years and magically they quit. But in business and the work that I do with executives, it's baby steps. And it's celebrating the small wins. That's something a lot of drivens don't do. And I know I suck at it. I do not celebrate very well, is we celebrate those small victories. So we had a client, a woman who at the end of one of our sessions, she was in our sales group. She said, you know what? I'm going to ride my bike 2 times for 10 miles between this session and session next week. And she's like, because I want to lose weight and all that kind of stuff. Came back the following week, and at the start of every session, we review, hey, did you do your commitment? And she goes, yeah, you know what? Things happen. I just got out my bike and I gave it a big wash. And I led the group in a giant round of applause for her. And she's looking around the room like, I just told you I failed. I just told you I didn't keep my commitment. And so the applause died down. And I said, you know what? I got a funny feeling. You're going to hit your commitment from last week, next week. Does that sound accurate? And she's like, absolutely. So comes back the following week, and she had ridden her bike 3 times for 20 miles.
Exactly. And it's, you make a small change and keep it.
Yeah.
Make a small change and keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very similar model.
Yeah.
And getting dressed, that's my joke about, I teach people how to feel good, because we, as drivens, we have no clue.
Nope.
Yeah. So driven women, what's your take on driven women? Because the book Driven, it's a very masculine book, wrote it with, Navy SEAL
Yep.
And I didn't have a lot of driven women in my world. I do now.
Yeah.
And talk about driven women. You got more experience, probably.
So, this goes to, again, that whole idea for me is about more effective human to human interactions. And I'll start by talking about I was at a executive breakfast recently, and it was about wellness for executives and team. And of course, at some point, someone started complaining about Gen Zs. And I was thinking, remember when we used to complain about millennials? That was the thing. And now we're complaining about Gen Zs. And so this leader finished, and I put my hand up. I said, they were trained that way. They didn't just show up at the office one day and go, I've got a way to piss my boss off. I saw it on TikTok. It's going to be amazing. They were trained that way. So if we're not meeting them where they are versus where we think they should be, and we're filtering their stuff, their requests through our worldview, we're offside as leaders. And so this goes back to Driven Women. And I've loving your podcast with Driven Women, because they talk about, and I am a gray-haired white male. Right. So like, I got lots of privilege. I get it. And I want to be able to use that to support especially the women in my life and the women who I work with.
Leadership is, that's my definition of management, is about changing external circumstances to control behavior. Leadership is literally to stand in someone else's shoes. Then you can lead them to where they need to be. And if you can't do that, then
amen.
Driven Women, and how does that apply?
Yeah. So Driven Women, my experience is that they're told, like, it's an overdone version of, can the polite girl just go sit in the corner, right? Seen and not heard. And the Driven Women, because of our wiring, right? We're all drivens. Because of our wiring, they're sitting in the corner just vibrating. And it's what's wrong with you? And this, ties back into like what Carol Dweck talked about with mindset, whereas boys are praised for effort and girls are praised for innate abilities. And so, for example, I have never said to either of my daughters that they're pretty or smart, ever. And I never will. It's always effort. It's always effort. My youngest daughter, she was 3, I think. And she's like, I'm beautiful in this dress. I said, you are beautiful. And you are wearing a dress that is very lovely. So keeping that separation between in who you are as a human being and whatever roles you're performing, and your effort in those roles, for me, is really, really critical. So as a society, we have this way of talking to women about their abilities and their successes and their things like that, that I feel is detrimental to their overall success, especially for driven women. And so when I'm working with a driven woman, whether she's in a leadership role or whether she's in a sales role or whatever, it's celebrating and supporting those aspects of her that have probably been discounted or sneered at ever since she was a little girl.
Yeah, that's really, man, we can go down some rabbit holes with driven men's identity. We mentioned it earlier, very external, very much about achievement, very much about thingness. And women integrate pretty and smart. If I'm pretty and smart, then I'm wanted by the herd or whatever. And as drivens overall, our identities shows. I mean, we are all over the map. Like, you want to send a driven to hell, to ask them to try to figure out who they are. Driven women identities is, how would you conceptualize a driven woman's identity when they first meet you?
Oftentimes they're the ones where we hate each other on sight, because there is that dual, right? So there's the masculine energy competing with the feminine energy, and the feminine energy is also bringing the drivenness to the table. And so some of the women who I have got along with the least upfront are the most driven. And then once we have the space to sit down and learn a little bit about each other, we actually discover we have this real powerful connection that is our drivenness. And then we can start to actually have a much more powerful conversation, as opposed to fighting on the surface level, which is where it started.
Because you bring a beautiful feminine energy that you discovered early. True masculinity comes from, divine feminine internal.
Yeah.
And that is, why do you think they buff against it so hard?
I believe because it is the unexpected, right? So we're all wired, our brains are wired to keep us safe, which usually means stuck. So we're looking for things that are different in the environment. Different usually means danger. And so we're looking for this danger. So I come in as, and I'm a 6'7", gray-haired white male. I'm loud, I'm opinionated. And so if you see that from afar, you're like, okay, I got this guy. I know what he's like. I got it. And then we show up and it's like, hey, how can I support you today? And they're like, okay, what?
Meet him with softness.
Which one of these things is not like the other? And so because of the internal story that has been made up, right? It's not my story, it's their story. I do the same thing on the reverse. I make up a story about them. And then I'm like, oh, they look pleasant and they're asking great questions, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get into a conversation and all of a sudden we're doing this. It's because our stories are conflicting. Not because we actually want to be in a fight. It's because the story we made up about the surface level is in conflict with what we're feeling underneath.
Oh my gosh, this sounds like you're talking about my husband and I, because we two butted heads. Like we literally met in our first date. We were like, we hate each other, but we couldn't let go.
Yeah.
And be careful what you wish for, because you gotta just,
But
from here, it's just all fun and games.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
it is so true what you're saying about the stories, because our personal stories, and then the other person is like, no, that's not me. And you're like, yeah, it is you. And you're like, no, that's not me. And we're both very powerful people.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's interesting because I see that people like on their second relationship end up being more in that way than their first relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. It's the opposite extreme, pendulum swings, and then you gotta
Mm-hmm.
learn how to land somewhere in the middle because the challenges are different, but they're there.
Exactly.
But talking to your feminine part, do you think that came from your mother's nurturing? Because like that's what I'm sensing.
Oh, 100%. Like when I first with my ex, and I'm not saying this to brag, it's a fact. I literally did the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the shopping, the grocery shopping, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it goes back to that supporting the tribe, right? Supporting the pack mentality. And again, where I grew up from, right? On the farm, it's all hands on deck. And if you're 4 years old and can hold a peeler, get to the carrots. And yeah, you know what? You might lose the side of a thumb every now and then. I probably did it several times, but you're there to support, you're there to help everybody so we can all be as whole as possible.
I think it's more than that. I think it's those stories that you tell of your mom, of the way she gently called you over and said, I'm not going to let you take flowers.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the moment you first ate. I have this sense, if I can imagine what your mom looked like, she just exuded that feminism, that like deep, didn't have to say a lot of words, but when she
Mm-hmm.
spoke, you listened kind of thing.
And she'd throw you off the damn bus.
And she, right. So there was a no BS, right? There was also
So
there was the boundaries.
You had integrated divine
Ooh,
masculine, divine
boundaries.
feminine, both. I mean, that
Ooh,
is,
you just mentioned something so big, boundaries. Most women
Mm-hmm.
believe that boundaries is an ugly thing. And when they realize that their beauty lays in the boundaries, that's when the
Mm-hmm.
real strength
Yeah.
shines through. So
Yeah.
that is so powerful, what you said.
Absolutely.
this is, man. Yeah, we're gonna have you back because I'm gonna go deep on that masculine, feminine. And driven women are, how do you teach driven women to become leaders?
Take what I said about the driven man, about they're never going to be you, right? But then let's back up a layer and go, okay, let's unpack you first. Let's get you comfortable with you, because right now it's all external, right? It's all this because that's how you've defended yourself, and that's how I defended myself, right? I defend myself with humor. I've defended myself with just like in some cases, physically pushing away, because that was my defense mechanism. So we have to get you back to you, back to who you are as a human being, and what your interests and desires are. Because again, experience driven women tend to subsume their interests and desires because they've been taught that's not going to help the group.
Right.
And so it's that extra step of, okay, let's talk to the human being before we try to get to the leader, and then we can build from there.
Yeah, it's that authenticity with self first.
Yep.
Then you can be authentic with others. This
Yep.
is, and we can go for hours. This is like for real. And you work for Sandler. How do we find you? How do we support you?
So easiest place that, and there's not many Hamish Knoxes in North America, right? So I'm very easy to find. My books are Accountability, The Sandler Way, and Change the Sandler Way, available Amazon. Just search for Hamish Knox and you'll probably stumble across them. If anyone's curious to learn about how we support our clients sustainably scale their sales, hamish.sandler.com/how-to-Sandler, and that's 2TO. Those are the best places to find me. And if you do want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, again, I'm easy to find. Just mention that you heard me on the I Am Driven podcast, because again, I love all of you. And if I don't have the context, I'm probably just going to be like, delete.
So driven. Comedy? Are you on stage now?
I'm not. I use it so in our sessions, the work that we do with our clients in the collaborative sessions, 50% are improv-based role play. So I write improv scenes every single week for our clients. And most of my coaching, my executive coaching, is, so Doug, tell me what's going on. Well, you know what? I got this team member, Rachel. She's not doing very well when it comes to closing. Like, okay, well, how about we role play it out? You be Rachel, I'll be you. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, you play it. I'll be Rachel, you be you. Okay, now let's roll it out, because the hardest 4 inches to move in our life is brain to mouth.
Yeah.
And so all the knowledge in the world is useless if it doesn't change our behavior. So I that's how I get my comedy needs met, is I'm using it in my training sessions on a regular basis.
You would, yeah. Do you know much about trauma healing?
Not a ton, no.
Oh man, yeah, I'll do it, because it's your ability to actually get people into their elephant and meet their elephant and come from their elephant and play in the elephant and all of that. That is, yeah, it's because you can role play this out and you see people lock up and they don't want to experience it.
Yeah.
There's the head to the heart. Yeah, so that's beautiful. So
that's actually the question I ask.
Good night. This is you're going to become back. You are going to come back.
I would love that.
Yeah, this
Thank
will be
you so
fun.
much.